Hello, everyone. Welcome to the listening room here at the Coaching Collective Online. Today we have guest Vidya Ramanathan, founder and consultant. Welcome, Vidya.
Thank you so much, Pam. It's lovely to be here.
I'm so glad that you are taking some time to share with me. Again, I know we've spoken before in the past, and I've been in frequent contact through the Only Vidya on Instagram, and I'm so glad we did connect. So I'm so glad that you're here to share your experiences and your wisdom of what you used to do, and then what led you to start your own company and what you're doing today.
Great. Thank you so much for the nice welcome.
So, what led you to doing what you're doing today? What did you used to do,
Hmm.
and then you started your own company? And what's the passion behind that change?
It's an interesting journey, because when I first started I've been a business owner for a very, very long time. So my first business I started in 2009. Yeah. And that was basically coming from this desire to have all this freedom in my life where I could do the thing I wanted to do without feeling like I was just stuck in a corporate job that was, I don't want to call it sucking the life out because I always enjoyed what I did, but I get bored doing the same thing over and over again, just bores the frick out of my mind, right? So I liked my consulting positions to be very challenging in different ways. So I've had that, beautiful experience of working in some amazing Fortune 500 businesses that have all done very different things. So I've gone from healthcare, which I know you've also been in healthcare. So from healthcare, I've gone to like the food industry, to the entertainment industry, and, I was just to a lot of the software as a service type of industry, to data analytics. So I've had so much breadth. That has really been awesome for me as a person. I love to grow in that way. So that is one of the things that drives me. But along the way, I also saw that a lot of the Fortune 500 leaders were struggling with moving up the ladder in their own way. Because once you get to that C level, or once you reach that position of responsibility, right, it kind of forces you to look at what do I do from here? How do I move from here? How do I become a better leader? It's not about getting to that leadership anymore. It's about how do I learn to become a better leader? And I saw a lot of them struggle with that, especially, when it came to growing their businesses in a way that felt connected to the humans that were working with them, but also, to move the business forward. Because sometimes those two can, as you can imagine, collide in a very unwanted way. So I saw the struggle, and I had been along the way, I always like interested in like holistic, like I said, I get bored very fast. So I study a number of things, and, I go along the holistic journey and really bringing that into my own personal life. And so I had this idea of, I was going through a lot in my life at that time. So I had this idea of really bringing together all of my dabblings in these different technologies and modalities of holistic living. And that gave me the idea of really working with Fortune 500 leaders. So I started doing that deeper work with Fortune 500 leaders at first, and then expanded to founders. That's really the full journey in like more sentences than you probably want to hear, but that was the journey. Yeah.
No, that's a great explanation, and people don't know what they don't know. So I think everything that you have to share can only help people looking for some type of assistance or needing to know how to get out of a certain situation and grow, which reminds me of the identity patterns that you talk about and how that caps individuals' growth, so to speak. I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on that as well.
Yeah, this one, I could probably talk for hours, so please cut me off if you feel like you want to bring me back on track. But, I had been working with, I studied yoga therapy just because I was very interested in physiology, anatomy,
Mhm.
and also the mind part of the anatomy, because I think a lot of Western medicine really misses out on who is this individual that we are working with, right? And having been in healthcare, in insurance, that was a really strong side of why I did what I did, like dabbled in Ayurveda, in fact, I know quite a bit about Ayurveda. So Ayurveda, yoga therapy, sister sciences. So I started studying that. That led to like really going into nervous system, attachment theory, and all of that, lovely things that the mind learns to pick up so much bullshit as we go through life. So I started getting really curious about that because I had picked up so much bullshit in my life. I wanted to really like uncover where is this bullshit coming from? Who's teaching me this bullshit? So I started understanding, I started seeing the patterns behind my own behavior, the behavior of Fortune 500 leaders, how their childhood, their upbringing was influencing their choices right now, which when you think about it, here's a 40, let's say the average young CEO is like 40, right? They're thinking about things that were in their childhood unconsciously and bringing that to the table when they're working with large organizations. This was like mind blowing to me. It's like, it shouldn't be allowed. There should be a prison for this or something like that, so and not in a bad way, in a humorous way. I think we all put ourselves in a mental prison of what we will accomplish and what we can't accomplish. So this is the part of me and the Fortune 500 leaders that I got, really fascinated with. So the patterns that were driving their behavior. And that's when my success in Fortune 500 really amplified, because I started seeing how they would behave before they could act. So I would almost preempt, like my team would be like, how did you know he was going to ask that question before he asked? I said, I just know it. So just go and do this and you'll be in the clear. So we were almost like 100% prepared for any scenario that would come up, and whatever would come up outside of those, we would handle it easily because we had the bandwidth, time crunching to handle that. My team was just fantastic with that. So this is what gave me the idea that if you can just bring that human mind to get it to step into the amazing awesomeness it's capable of, not just the other side, which is we can totally go into that, I can't do anything, completely defeated attitude in life, or we can come into this elevated view of what all our experiences have taught us and bring that in a new way to our lives. So this is what I started seeing a lot in Fortune 500, and these leaders really needed help. So I couldn't help them, so I started working initially with just what I was given, and then expanded to work with Fortune 500 leaders on a more closer basis, just personal basis, and then with founders on the patterns, the identity patterns that were really governing their choices without them realizing that it was running them, so the rules they'd gotten used to as kids, you do it this way or no way at all, and that can hurt your delegation, how you decide, it can hurt your standards. And there's nothing wrong with having standards, but also having a very inclusive set of standards where you're growing through other people's standards is really important, so hiring to those standards, getting to the goals that they were supposed to get to without feeling more pressure than they're already feeling, in their jobs. So that is where I came in. And that's my specialty of work, the identity, what's the childhood, what does the childhood look like of this person, and how have they used it to carve the success they have right now. But there comes a point when that success, that exact set of patterns is working against them now. So the hard work that they were used to, which got them to that CEO level because they got the results that they needed, is the exact pattern that's going to hold them back from delegating to the people and trusting the people to run with it. So those are the types of things that start to come up. So that's at the identity level, being able to get into what are those patterns, what are the drivers behind those patterns, and seeing the other side of those patterns.
Yeah.
Some people call it dark side, some people call it the light side, whatever you call it, right? It doesn't matter to me. To me, it's like every pattern has different perspectives. So we can bring those different perspectives and shed light on where it's most appropriate to use it and where it's not so appropriate to use it. So it becomes very contextual at that point. Yeah.
How do you tell the difference between a strategy problem from an identity problem when a business stalls?
It's usually almost always both. So you have a strategy component, but the strategy is either being put together because there's a certain fear. Like, let me give you an example of this. I recently worked with a client. She wanted to grow her business. She was at 2-something million in her business. I can't remember the exact numbers, but 2.2 or something along those lines. And then she wanted to get it to be like a $5 million business. And so she had a certain set of strategies. She had a one-to-one program. She had a group program, and that is the format in which she was working. So now she said, okay, I have a group program already, Vidya. I have a one-to-one program already too, Vidya. I want to open up retreats, blah, blah, And then she had a contradictory goal. She said, I want to cut my hours at the same time. So we had to really delve into like, where's her joy sitting? Like, is it sitting in the retreats? Is it sitting in the one-on-one? Is it sitting in the group? Because there's a certain reality that business owners fight with, which is I have this much time and I want to do all of this. And then I also want to have a life. For a lot of business owners, it's that. Some don't care about that, right? So in this case, that's what it was. She wanted to also have a life. She wanted to go back to her partner. She didn't have any kids, but she wanted to spend time with her partner, you know. So we got crystal clear on the exact thing that would give her the joy in her business. Because she was going through the motions. She wanted to add one more thing. And then what we found out was that the retreat was probably at the wrong timing in her life right now. She wanted to build with her partner. So the thing I suggested to her is the strategy was let's increase your prices. And of course, you know, the moment I said that, she went into freeze land, right? She is like, I don't think this is the right time to increase prices because I already have a certain set of clients. So all of the bullshit that she told herself that her work didn't deserve to be paid at that higher level, didn't deserve that investment, started to come up.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is the work. So the strategy, she had it. She already had the strategy, but she thought in her brain, in her mind, the only way to grow is to add a retreat. But how can I do this when I'm already short of time that I want to spend with my partner? These are colliding objectives. And most people try to build their business separate of their life. I don't do that. I build the business to the life of the person who is running the business. Because otherwise, everything else is stumbling blocks, basically. Everything is just falling down, you know? So when we then set a goal to increase her prices, we said 2 times, we're going to double your prices. You don't have to do it right now. Let's find out where your comfort zone is. So we ran her through her comfort zone. We found out it was probably increasing it by 20%. So we started there, you know, and then I asked her, okay, let's push you a little bit. If I said, we're going to increase it to 50%, what comes up for you right now? Oh, my work doesn't deserve that. So we went back and strengthened where her work did deserve that. So we looked at all the areas where she'd already accomplished that, you know, and then we went back to where in the early business years, earlier in her childhood, she learned to cap herself as deserving only that bar. And we looked at what she was adding to her client's life. See, most people think of the business as, will the client get the exact result that they're looking for? That's the ROI. But the ROI is actually a lot deeper. It's what they're looking to get in their business, but plus what you're getting them in their personal life through the business. It's never just the business. So this is the model that a lot of, not everybody, but a lot of business coaches actually miss this model because they're thinking in terms of just the business, you know. So when we looked at this entire life model that I like to call it, she realized the value she was offering was way bigger than what she was charging. And it's funny because she went from 20% increase right to 100% increase on her prices.
That's amazing.
So that's, you know, when you ask me strategy plus, it's almost always both, you know, it's always a combination of those two. So if I were to change the strategy, how does that work for that person's life? You know, if it doesn't work, it doesn't belong there, you know, so yeah, it's a clear choice.
And the example that you just shared, is that an experience with your client where you also discussed the 3Ds? I know you talk a lot about the 3Ds. Is that a time where you also implemented that strategy or that information?
Yeah, so the 3Ds, you know, that you're referring to is essentially decision, delegation, and drive. You know, it's founded in my philosophy that if you're not deciding clearly in your business, you won't delegate well. And I'm simplifying it a little bit right now for the purpose of your audience. You know, so if you're not going to decide well, you're not going to delegate well because your decision is not on a solid ground, you know, and then you're going to also end up doing a lot of the work yourself. So your drive, your levels of fatigue in the business are also going to go up. Now, you can start anywhere on this triangle. If you look at it as a triangle, you can start anywhere and you'll realize that, you know, if your drive is low, then your decisions are going to struggle. Your, you know, delegation is going to struggle. You know, you can start a delegation and you're still going to have the problem. So you can't ignore any one of these or compromise on any one of these in a business. It's almost like it's an ironclad triangle. You know, you can't move out of it. So the only way to move out of it is to recognize where you are in your business and take the approach that your business requires at that point in time based on your life circumstances. You might might be at a point where your health is more important than making $100 million. I tell you, I've in my life walked away. It's funny because I was walking my dog today and I was just thinking about this one client who was corporate client, and I won't say which year because a lot of people can probably trace it back. So I won't say which year, but in the 2000s, I worked with this corporate client who had this habit of being quite abrupt and aggressive in a lot of calls, in a lot of meetings. So I can deal with a lot of it in a very neutral way, but at some point I started seeing that the people who were reporting to me were also having to deal with that. So I made a conscious decision to walk away from that client. I actually, it's funny because in that week, it was like in the middle of the week, I literally called him and I said, I will not report to you because I think you are not honoring the dynamics of the team environment. So I will not report to you. And I said, because I'm leaving you abruptly, I'm not going to charge you for this week. I gave him the money and I walked out. It's very interesting because I didn't feel like it was the wrong thing to do. It felt like the right thing to do at that point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I were desperate for money at that point, I probably might have stuck it out like a lot of people do, right? And there's no judgment around that. But, I'm at a point where it matters who I work with. I think a lot of business owners don't give themselves enough credit for who they want to work with. They don't pay attention to that. But I think it's a really important aspect of business too, to also be able to do that. So there's a lot of balancing factors in a business, and where you are at is going to determine to a large extent what you're willing to put up with, what you're willing to strategize on, and work toward. I think hopefully that answers your question.
It does. And you have a lot of great advice and wisdom. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that story that you went through. That leads me to a question I wanted to ask you about, like looking back in time at who you used to be as to who you are now. If you could go back to the executive advisor version of yourself, what's some advice that you could give yourself at this point, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There would be so many pieces of that. But I think if I were to zero in on something I would tell myself, it would be to hold my value, not in monetary dollars always, because as a woman who is stepping into a man's world and corporate and, owning this business and stepping in, I knew I was better than most of my male counterparts out there. I knew that. But I also knew that I was probably getting paid at least a 1/3 less than my male counterparts. But you know how it goes in corporate, so, but in consulting world, it's still the same, So I would say hold your value. You may not always have an opportunity to demonstrate it. And then sometimes we have to take a lesser value in order to get to where we want to be. Okay. But it needs to be a conscious choice, not something that feels forced on you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the single biggest piece. I see a lot of business owners put themselves into this category of I will never do this, or I will always do this kind of buckets, right? But I think there's a context to it. I think the context is, there are some situations where it might be worth it to offer something that is lesser. And there are certain situations where it's not, in my own philosophy, you look at the person that's sitting across from you and you say, is this person is beyond what they're paying me? Is there value to me working with them? If they're not paying me 100% in dollars, is the value coming through the connections they're giving me? Is the value coming, through how well they work with me? Are they working in a way that's cohesive with my team? All of these factors are what drives fulfillment in life. But a lot of people get used to looking at only one part of it, which is some people look at, I will never do anything that makes me unhappy, or just the money part of it. And I think what that leads to is this internal divide where it only leads to more frustration and more, resistance on the inside. That's my philosophy, so.
Yeah, that's nice. So, what does success look like to you now?
I think success means not just money, but are you feeling that connection to your life? Like right now in my life, I'm doing exactly what I want to do in my life, the way I want to do it. I live the way I want to live. It carries beyond work. Like it's not just work trying to fulfill you, but is your life fulfilling you? Is it filling you up or is it draining you? I don't do anything like, my dog has required care over the last, over the last 6 months, so I don't do it because I feel obliged to do it. I do it because it feels expansive for me to help her through this.
Mhm.
And when I take that attitude, it doesn't feel like a weight on my shoulders. It feels like I love it. I bring that warmth to it, all of my heart into it. That's ultimately for me the biggest indicator of whether your life and job or business are doing the work they're meant to do for you. Are they working for you as opposed to you working for them? So yeah.
Well, you definitely are in alignment with your integrity, your values, your passion, and what you're doing. And I love seeing all the footage and the content with your dog, and your cooking looks amazing. And of course, your business advice. I just love that you share on Instagram and on LinkedIn. Where are the places that people can find you?
I am primarily on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I do actually offer a private advisory too, but it's very I don't publicize it at all. So I have a private advisory practice, and then what you see on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the social media platforms, more the public part of my work. So those are the main avenues to find me. I think on Instagram and Facebook it's at the only Vidya, and on LinkedIn it's just slash Vidya Ramanathan or Ramanathan Vidya, maybe something like that. I can pop those for you and you can add them to the episode if you like. Yeah.
Absolutely. We will definitely do that. Thank you, Vidya. And if
Yes.
there's anything else you wanted to share that you have going on personally, or what's next in your path?
Well, what's next in my path? Right now, I am in France. Part of you know my travels and all of these things, but your audience may not. So one of my things is I love architecture and traveling, and I love food of all kinds. So the best part of my world is I'm in France in Paris. One of the food capitals of the world, and then I spend time in London, and I'm back in California usually for a couple of months. So I'm usually moving around quite a bit, but it's incredible for me, the diversity. It's not always the easiest thing to do. To actually move spot to spot is not always the easiest thing to do, but the architecture and the food and the opportunities to meet people of new cultures. I just had an amazing, beautiful time with a lady here. It's so sweet. It was just the sweetest moment, Pam. This morning I walked out of my apartment, and my doggie was walking with me, and I saw this lovely lady just walking toward, and this is a big city, obviously, Paris, so it was so interesting because we caught each other's eye and there was an immediate connection between us, and I smiled, and then she stopped. And it's funny because this always happens. People start talking to me in French and I don't know a ton of French, so I was talking to her. I said, look, I really don't know a lot of French, I can manage a few words. And so she switched to English, and I couldn't believe it. She said, I'm 87 years old, and she looked so amazing, Pam. I said, what is your secret? Oh my God, you look like you're 55 or 60. Seriously, I was like blown away by her, how young she looked. And so we started talking, and she told me that she'd lost her husband 3 years back. He was 97 when he passed away. And she said, the biggest challenge I have right now is I feel so lonely. I feel so alone. And so we talked for a little bit, and it was the strangest thing because it was like I've seen both my godparents pass away, within 2 years of each other, one in 2022, and just following my mom's passing. And then another one, not last year, but end of 2024 to early 25, she passed away. And it's so funny because I saw both of them in her. It was almost like, oh my goodness, this could be Ted and Marlene walking around, together. And then it was interesting. So we said goodbye to each other, and I took my dog out again the next time, and there she was again. I was like, what are the odds of this happening
Mm-hmm.
in one single morning, to see her twice? She started laughing. So I took a picture with her because it's like, this is uncanny,
Sweet. Yes.
It's so sweet. It was just the sweetest moment. She said, I have to go to do something and come back. So at that point, by then she's like, I want you to have my address, if anything comes up, just, reach out. So we exchanged addresses. But my point is, this is the sweetness of life, this is the amazingness of life. That little moment where you realize I have a genuine connection when everybody else is walking by, and you have this one moment where you can catch with this one person. And here she was really lonely,
Mhm.
smiling away. She loved the fact that I have a dog, and she was just petting the dog, because she was just really missing that human connection in that moment, So to be able to share that obviously meant I was late everywhere today. So that, I was a little late running everywhere today. But the point is, it's so beautiful to be able to share that with her. That one specific moment. That's what the human connection is. And it's something we bring to business, whether you're doing business with that person or whether it's a referral partner or whatever it is, it's all of us, right? It's all, every part of us coming into that conversation. I think that's the beauty of the moment. So if you're not really finding joy in it,
Mhm.
make it so it does bring that joy back in you. That's
Beautiful, beautiful experience that you shared. I'm right there with you on building connection and making connections. You just never know who you're going to meet, and to have the ability and the capacity to be open and be in line with your intuition to recognize I mean, you stopped and you paid attention to her and you started a conversation with her, and it led to a beautiful friendship. I believe you two will become friends, and you're absolutely right. That's what life's about, and those beautiful moments and connections. I love
exactly.
that.
And I've learned through some life experiences that those moments are what you look back on and be really grateful for, because when my mom passed away, she was, I wasn't next to her,
So, yeah, I'm so
That's
sorry.
a really hard thing to deal with sometimes. She was in India, I was in the US. I still get a little teary talking about her, but
Yeah.
but I can always look back on the moments that I've spent with her, the moments where I have given her my full presence and be grateful for those moments.
Beautiful. Thank you, Vidya. I'm so
Absolutely.
glad to have you here today, and thank you for sharing all that you've shared. And I know that many people will listen and gain some wisdom from you. And I encourage everybody to follow you and reach out to you, because I am glad that we connected, and I consider you a friend of mine. And I can't wait until we can meet in person today or someday. That would just be a wonderful moment. So until
Yeah.
then, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Vidya.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to be here.